Hello and good evening to this special edition of Kali Yuga episode one. Um, no, welcome to this stream, which is this was a bet I put on myself on Iron Duke's channel about a month ago now, and I said if I can't, somebody else peaked 1,000 subs. I said if I can't peak 1,000 subs, or uh, um, I'm going to aim to reach 1,000 by May. If I don't, I will do a live reading of the most depraved, the most um, fucked up, basically, book out there that I can think of, and that was the 120 Days of Sodom by Marquis de Sade. And here we are. I lost. I didn't reach 1,000. Um, I did try, but here we are. And as an Englishman, I have to keep as a worm, my honor, because my word is my bond and my oath to all of you. And so here we are. No one wanted to be here. None of this had to happen, but that this is just how it is. This is life. But I will say, I am interested to explore this in the sense of we're going to be delving into the mind of the average um uh I guess sort of like the brain of all the negative and bad ideas that come from liberalism, or the most extreme versions of it, the most extreme forms of liberty and of egalitarianism. This is going to be all to bear. Yes, keeping your honor if it costs your soul. Uh, yes. So welcome, Aaron Hook. Um, yeah. I will add my light, because I do this in an office. My my light in the office has ceased to work, so I've had to sort of bring a candle up um, at the moment. So this is all being done in candlelight on my end. So this should be good. This should be good. Um, this should, I mean, this is going to be horrific. For people who are going to be watching this who don't know, I mean, Aaron Hook knows, Hitman, Iron Duke, um, Seb. I don't know if you know. Um, this is going to be. This isn't even. It's not pornographic. This is sadist insanity. I mean, this is the most deprived, cursed thing on the planet, and we're going to do a live reading of it. So, with that being said, here's your warning now. There is a good chance that this stream will be removed from YouTube and my channel nuked because of this. But you know, my word of honor, my word of honor. Aubrey is here. Aubrey is here. Yes, I'm not surprised Aubrey's here. She was the most eager of them all. This is the state. I'm actually going to. I have a banner here, or logo of the Saints. I'm gonna have to remove that because this is it's not. It's just not worth it. It's just my I'm gonna have to do like a lot of confessions. I'm gonna have to do a lot of Hail Marys after this. Anyway, with that being said, I don't know, maybe I'll contact my Connor, because he's in Chicago. He can hook me up with the Pope. He can give me a special dispensation for the stream. Anyway, that being said, let's get started. Right. Oh God, I got the PDF here as well. Even the PDF is cursed. Right. Right. Oh God. Oh, well, the PDF is now spinny. Yeah. No, Aaron's right. I mean, bear in mind the chapters are split up in days. Right? So you have like the first day and to the 19th day. It'd be interesting to see how far I can get before. you know, I reckon about day 6, to be honest. I mean, it just. I mean, it starts off rough. It just goes downhill after. But anyway. Uh, oh, sorry, it goes to 30 days, I should say. Um, and there are other parts to this, but um, so I'll just do a brief introduction. Um, so this is note. The 120 Days of Sodom, or The School of Licentiousness, is a novel by the French writer and nobleman uh, Donyentin Alphonse Francois, Marquis de Sade, written in 1785. It tells the story of four wealthy male libertines who resolve to uh, experience the ultimate sexual gratification in orgies. To do this, they seal themselves away for 4 months in an inaccessible castle with a harem of 46 victims, mostly young male and females, and engage four women brothel keepers to tell them the stories of their lives and adventures. The women's narratives form an inspiration for the sexual abuse and torture of the victims, which gradually mounts in intensity and ends in their slaughter. The work remained unpublished until the 20th century. You don't. By the way, if you want to know who resurrected this, you will. For people who are familiar with, certain people around Freud and co. Yes, it's that lot there. Anyway, the work remained unpublished until the 20th century. In recent times, it has been translated into many languages, including English, Japanese, and German. And due to its themes and sexual violence, extreme cruelty has been frequently banned. It was banned in the UK, I think, up until the 60s, and it was banned in the United States as well. So, let's begin. Introduction. The extensive wars wherewith Louis XIV was burdened during his reign, while draining the state's treasury and exhausting the substance of the people, none the less continued the secret that led to the prosperity of a swarm of those bloodsuckers who were always on the watch for public calamities, which, instead of appeasing, they promote or invent so as precisely to be able to profit from them the most advantageously. The end of this is very sublime reign was the end of this very sublime reign was perhaps one of the periods in history of the French Empire when one saw the emergence of the greatest number of these mysteries fortunes, whose origins are an obscure as the lust and the debauchery that accompany them. Hello. So I do not know what happened there. My whole computer just did a restart. I don't think it was Twitter taking me out, so I just had to pop onto my phone. So sorry everyone, bear with me. This is uh all the gremlins are coming out today. Um yeah, uh I will start that I'll start off from where I was last time. I do apologize. That was a uh, I don't know what happened there, so just bear with me. Right. Yes. I am considering this might be just divine providence trying to stop me from stop me from this, but we must continue. It's my word of honor. It's my word of honor. If I haven't got that, I haven't got anything. Um, Everything's gone freaking haywire today. I tell you. Right. Ugh. All right. Load up the PDF again. I mean, what is interesting though, I mean, this is a side note. If anyone has read Thomas, while waiting for the PDF to sort its fucking head out, um, if anyone has read Thomas Carlyle, um, particularly on the French Revolution, the debauchery and everything. I mean, yeah, it's the most prevalent under the reign of terror and the revolutionaries. But it did have its origin in the aristocracy before. This sort of nature and this sort of fascination, and it was a rot that came from before. And his sort of argue, a bit like with Cromwell, that this was like it required like this clearing out force. And so, yeah, that Marquis de Sade sort of briefly sort of referenced this a bit. This sort of the decadence and of society and the bourgeois sort of morality sort of playing in here. But anyway, I got the PDF back, so let's get back to this. The end of this very sublime reign was perhaps one of the of the period was perhaps one of the periods in history of the French Empire when one saw the emergence of a greatest number of these mysteries, fortunes whose origins are as obscure as the lust and debauchery that accompanied them. It was towards the close of this period, and not the long before, the regent sought, by means of famous tribunal, which goes under the name of Chamber de Justice, to flush this multitude of traffickers, that for them conceive the idea for the singular revels whereof we are going to give an account. One must not suppose that it was exclusively the low-born and the vulgar sort which did this swindling. Gentlemen of the highest note led the pack. Uh, the Duke de Blanguis and his brother, Bishop of, and this is redacted, X. So, um, each of whom had thuswise amassed immense fortunes, are in themselves solid proof that, like the others, the nobility neglected no opportunities to take this road to wealth. These two illustrators figures, through their pleasure and business, closely associated with the celebrated uh, uh, Ducret and President de Cavour, were the first to hit upon the debauch we propose to chronicle, and having communicated the scheme to their two friends, all four agreed to assume the major roles in these unusual orgies. For above 6 years, these four libertines, kindred through their wealth and taste, had thought to strengthen their ties by means of alliance which debauchery had by far a heavy part than any of the other motives that ordinarily serve as a basis for such bonds. It's funny because this is kind of like Epstein's Island. This was what many people, particularly that are into the whole Epstein stuff and the files and the connections, is basically if you get these high profile figures to do pretty, you know, outright illegal and disgusting things. I mean, it's kind of like it's more likely that this is a good way you can blackmail them because you get them in these compromising positions, and it sort of builds like this sort of unholy alliance, where everyone has a lot to lose. Okay. What they arranged was as follows: the Duke de Blaguis, thrice a widower and sire of two daughters, one wife had given him, having noticed that the President de Cavour appeared interested in marrying the elder of these girls, despite the familiarities he knew perfectly well her father had indulged in with her, and the Duke, I say, suddenly conceived the idea of a triple alliance. Yes, Aubrey as well, P. Diddy, same tactic. I'm not going to do French accents in this. I apologize. I'm not a good impersonator. You want Julie for your wife, said he, the Cuval. I give her to you unhesitatingly, and put one condition to the match, that you'll not be jealous when, although your wife, she continues to show me the same complacency she has always has in the past, which is more, I'd have lent your voice to mine in persuading our good Duquette to give me his daughter Constance, for whom I must confess I have developed roughly the same feelings you have formed for Julie. But, said Cavell, you are surely aware that Duquette just as libertine as you. I know all that's to be known, the Duke rejoined. In this age, and with our manner of thinking, is one halted by such things. Do you think I seek a wife in order to have a mistress? I have a wife, that my whims may be served. I want her to veil, to cover an infinite number of little secret debaucheries the cloak of marriage wonderful conceals. In a word, I want her for the reasons you want my daughter. Do you fancy I am ignorant of your object and desires? We libertines wed women to hold slaves. As women, they are rendered more submissive than mistresses, and you know the value we set upon despotism in the joys we pursue. It was at this point Duquette entered. His two friends related their conversation, and, delightedly by the overture which promotely induced him to avow the sentiments he had conceived for Adelaide, the President Ducats accepted the Duke as his son-in-law, provided he might become Cavals. The three marriages were speedily concluded, the dowries were immense, and the wedding contracts identical. No less culpable than his two colleagues, the President had admitted to Ducat who betrayed no displeasure upon learning it, that he maintained a little clandestine commerce with his own daughter, the three fathers each wishing not only to preserve his right, but noticing here the possibility of extending them, commonly agreed that the three young ladies bound to their husbands by good and homes only would not in body belong more to one than to any of them, and the severest punishments were prescribed for her who should take it into her head not to comply with any of the conditions whereunto she was subject. They were on the eve of realizing their plan when Bishop of redacted, already close bound through pleasure shared with his brother, two friends proposed contributing a fourth element to the alliance, should the other three gentlemen consent into his participation in the affair. This element, the Duke's second daughter, and hence the bishop's niece, was already more thoroughly his property than was generally imagined. He had affected connections with his sister-in-law, and the two brothers knew beyond all shadow of doubt that the existence of this maiden, who was called Eileen, was far more accurately to be ascribed to the bishop than to the duke. The former, who, from this time she left the cradle, had taken the girl into his keeping, had not, as may well suppose, stood idle as the years brought her charms to flower, and so on. Upon his head he was uh, his colleague's equal, and the article he offered to put on the market was in equal degree damaged or degraded. But as Arlene's attractions and tender youth outshone even those of her three companions, she was unhesitatingly made a part of of the bargain. As had the other three, the bishop yielded up her the retained as the bishop yield her up, but retained the rights to use her to her use, and so each of her four characters thus found himself husband to four wives. Thus there resulted an arrangement which, for the reader's convenience, we shall recapitulate. So this is the characters. Um, the Duke, Julie's father, becoming husband to become the husband of Constance Duquette's daughter. Duquette, Constance's father, um, becoming the husband of Adelaide, the president's daughter. The president, the president who is the father, Adelaide's father, become the husband of Julie, the Duke's eldest daughter, and the bishop, who is the brother of the Duke, Eileen's uncle and father, um, of the other three females by succeeding the same Eileen to his friends, uh, and retaining the same rights over all of the daughters. All right. So I'm just going to reorientate this because I can barely see. I'm going blind already. It was a superb estate of the Duke, situated in the Bourgogne, that these happy matches were made, and I leave to the reader to fancy how they were consummated, and in what orgies, obliged as we are to describe others, we shall forego the pleasure of picturing these. Upon the return to Paris, our four friends' associations became only the firmer, and as our next task is to make the reader familiar with them, before proceeding to individual and more searching developments, a few. A few details of their uh, Libericus arrangements will serve. Um, it seems to me to shed a preliminary light upon the character of these debaucheries. The society had created a common fund, which each of its members took his turn administrating for 6 months. The sums allocated for nothing but expenses in the interest of pleasure were vast. Their excessive wealth put the most unusual things within their reach, and the reader ought not be surprised to hear that 2 million were annually distributed to obtain good cheers and lust satisfaction. Four accomplished uh, proce- proce- procur- precursors, uh, excuse me, let me start again. Four accomplished precursors to recruit women and similar number of pimps to scout out men had the sole duty to range both the capital and the provinces and bring back everything. In the one gender and the and in the other they could best satisfy their sensuality's demands. For super parties were held regularly every week in four different country houses located at four extremities of Paris. At the first of these gatherings, the one exclusively given over to the pleasure of sodomy, only men were present. They would always be at hand 16 young men, ranging in ages from 20 to 30, whose immense faculties permitted are for heroes. I can't call them heroes, but yeah, in feminine guises to taste the most agreeable delights. The youths were selected solely upon the basis of the size of their members, and it almost became necessary that this superb limb be such magnificence that it could never have penetrated any woman. This was essential clause, and as naught was spared by way of expense, only very rarely would it fail to be fulfilled. But simultaneously to sample every pleasure to these 16 husbands was joined the same quantity of boys, much younger, whose purpose was to assume the office of women. These lads were from 12 to 18 years old, and to be chosen for the service of each had to propose a freshness, a face, graces, charms, an air, and his innocence, a candor which was far beyond what our brush could possibly paint. No women had admitted to these masculine orgies, in the course of which everything of the lewdest invented in Sodom and Gomorrah was executed. At the second supper were girls of superior class who, upon these occasions, forced to give up their proud ostentation and the customary insolence of their bearing, were constrained, in return for their hire, to abandon themselves to the most irregular caprices, and often even to the outrages our libertines were pleased to inflict upon them. 12 of these excuse me, 12 of these girls would appear, and as Paris could not uh, furnish a fresh supply of them as often as would have been necessary, these evenings were interspersed with others at which were admitted only in the same number as the well-bred ladies, women ranging from uh, precursors up through the class of officers' wives. There are above 4 to 5,000 in Paris who belong to one or other of these two latter classes, whom need or lust obligers to attend soirees uh, of this kind. One has but to have good agents to find them, and our libertines, who were splendidly represented, would frequently come across miraculous specimens. But it was in vain. One was honest or a decent woman. One had to submit everything. Our lordships, uh, libertinage of a variety that had never brooks limits, would overwhelm with horrors and infamies whatever, whether by nature or social convention, ought to have exempt from such ordeals. Once one was there, one had to be ready for anything, and as for our four villains had every taste that accompanies the lowest, most capricious debauch, this fundamental acquiescence to their desire was not by any means a matter of inconsequence. The guests at the third supper were the vilest, foulest creatures that could be possibly met with. To him who has some acquaintance with debauchery, extravagance, this refinement will appear wholly understandable. 'Tis most voluptuous to wallow, to speak, so to speak, in filth with persons of this category. These excesses offer the completest abandon, the most monstrous intemperance, the most total abasement, and the pleasures compared with those tasted the evening before, or with the distinguished individuals in whose company we have tasted them, have a way of lending a sharp spice to early activities. At these third suppers, debauchery being more uh, thorough, nothing has omitted that might render it, uh, it complex and piquant. 100 whores would appear in the course of 6 hours, and only too often something less than the full 100 would leave the games. But there is nothing to be gained by hurrying our story, or by approaching subjects which can only receive adequate treatment in the sequel. Oh bloody hell! There's more. There's a sequel planned in the work. Um, As for the fourth supper, it was reserved for young maidens, only those between the age of uh, goodness me, uh, uh, effectively underage. I'm not reading that on there. And I, yeah, I'm not reading that on there. Sorry. Uh, Between the ages of underage, basically, were permitted. Their conditions in life was no importance. What counted was their looks. They had to be charming. As for their virginity, authentic evidence was required. Oh, incredible refinement of libertinage! It was not assuredly that they wished to pluck all those roses, and how indeed could they have done so? For those untouched flowers were always a score in number, and for our four libertines only two were capable of proceeding to the act. One of the remaining two, the financier, being absolutely incapable of of an erection, and the bishop being absolutely unable to take his pleasure, save in the fashion which, yes, I agree, may dishonor a virgin, but which, however, always leaves her perfectly intact. No matter, the 20 maidenhead had to be there, and those which were not impaired or by our courted of masters became before their eyes the most prey of certain of their valets, just as depraved as they whom they kept constantly at beck and call for more than one reason. Apart from these four supper parties, there were others, a secret and private one held every Friday, involving many fewer persons, but surely costing a great deal more. The participants were restricted to 4 young and high-born damsels who, by means of strategy and money, had been abducted from their parents' homes. Oh, bloody hell. Um, our Libertines' wives nearly always had a share in this debauchery, and their extreme submissiveness, their docile attentions, their services made it more of a success each time. Oh, as for the genial atmosphere of these suppers, it goes without saying that even greater profusions than delicacy reigned there. Not one of these meals cost less than 10,000 francs, and neighboring countries as well as France were ransacked. So, what was the rarest and most exquisite might but be assembled together? Fine and abundant wines and liquors were there even during the winter. They had fruits of every season. In a word, one may be certain that the table of the world's greatest monarch was not dressed with much luxury, nor served with equal magnificence. But now let us retrace our steps and do our best to portray one of each of our 4 heroes, to describe each not in terms of the uh, beautiful, not in a manner that would seduce or captivate the reader, but simply with the brushstroke of nature, which, despite all her disorder, is often sublime. Indeed, even when she is at heart most depraved. For, and why not say so in passing, if crime lacks the kind of delicacy one finds in virtue, is not the former always more sublime? Does it not unfeignedly have a character of grandeur and sublimity which surpasses and will always make it preferable to the most monstrous lackluster charms of virtue? Will you protest the greater usefulness of this, and for that is it for us to scan nature's laws, ours to determine whether vice, being just as necessary to nature as is virtue, she perhaps does not implant us in equal quantity the penchant for the other, one or the other, depending upon her respective needs? But let us proceed. I do want to add just a sort of caveat there. This is if you ever encounter a secularist, um, or somebody who is, basically like an atheist liberal type, especially if you look at the writings of the humanist societies and everything. This is without all the rapey stuff in there. It is very very similar, sort of like natural law and everything else, and deconstructing um, social fabric. There's the social fabric of society. But anyway, as Marquis de Sade says, let us continue. um, I might, I will have to do. I won't be obviously doing the whole book, by the way, and there'll be like several parts to this. But anyway, anyway, uh, oh fuck's sake, lost it. The Duke, uh, at 18, the master of an already colossal fortune, which his later speculations must much increased, experienced all the difficulties which descend like a cloud of locusts upon a rich and influential young man who need not deny himself anything. It almost always happens to such cases that the extent of one's vices and one's stints on self that much less the more one has the means to procure oneself everything. Had the Duke received a few elementary qualities from nature, they might possibly have counterbalanced the dangers which beset him in his position. But this curious mother, who sometimes seems to collaborate with chance in order that the latter may favour every vice she gives to those certain beings of whom she expects attentions very different from those uh, virtue supposes, and this because she has just as much need of the one as the other. Nature, I say, is destining uh, uh, Duke Blangus for immense wealth, had meticulously endowed him with every impulse, every inspiration required for its abuse, together with the with a, uh temperous and very evil mind. She had accorded him a heart of flint and an utter criminal soul, and with these, well accompanied by disorder in taste and irregularity of a whim, whence were born the dreadful libertinage um, to which the Duke was in no common measure addicted. Born treacherous, harsh, im- imperious, barbaric, selfish, as lavish in the pursuit of pleasure as misery when it were a question of useful spending, a liar, a gourmand, a drunk, a dastard, a sodomite, fond of incest, given to murder, to arson, to theft. No, not a single virtue compensated that host of vices. Why, what am I saying? Not only did he never so much as dream of a single virtue, he beheld them with horror, and he was frequently heard to say that to be truly happy in this world, a man ought not merely fling himself into every vice, but should never permit himself one virtue, and that it would not simply matter of always doing evil, but also and above all, never doing good. Okay. All right, again, a bit of dialogue here. Oh, there are plenty of people, the Duke used to observe, who never misbehave, save when passion spurs them to ill. Later, the fire gone out of them, their now calm, peaceful, calm spirit peacefully returns to the path of virtue, and thus passing their life going from strife to error, and from error to remorse. They end their days in such a way there is no telling just what roles have enacted on earth. Such persons, he would continue, must surely be miserable, forever drifting, continually undecided. Their entire life is spent detesting in the morning what they did the evening before, certain to repent of the pleasure they had tasted. They take delight in quaking in such sort they become at once virtuous in crime and criminal in virtue. However, our hero would add, my more solid character is a stranger to these contradictions. I do my choosing without hesitation, and I am always sure to find pleasure in the choice I make. Never does regret to rise to dull its charm. Firm is my principles, because those I formed are around, and were formed very early. I always act in accordance with them. They have made me understand the emptiness and nullity of virtue. I hate virtue. I never will I be resorting to it. They have persuaded me that through vice only is man capable of experiencing this moral and physical vibration, which is the source of the most delicious voluptuousness. So I give myself over to vice. I was still very young when I learned to hold religion's fantasies in contempt, being perfectly convinced that the existence of a creator is a revolting absurdity in which not even children continue to believe. I have no need to thwart my inclinations in order to flatter some god. Um, Again, the sort of striving for just constant pleasure. I mean, does it sound familiar? Does it sound familiar? If you're in a town today, if you can look out, see people walking in the streets, going off into a nightclub, you know, it's not too far. It's not too far from this. Remember this bit. This is all considered shocking. I mean, not just the incest and the actually descriptive part of it, but all of this. But there you go. These instincts were given me by nature, and it would be uh, irate, and it would be to irate her were I were to resist them. If she gave me bad ones, this that is because they were necessary to her designs. I am in her hands, but a machine which she runs as she likes, and not one of my crimes does not serve her. The more she urges me to commit them, the more of them she needs. I should not be fooled to disobey her. Thus nothing but the law stands in my way, but I defy the law. My gold and my prestige keep me well beyond reach of those vulgar instruments of repression, which should be employed only upon the common sort. I mean, this, this is Epstein. This is it, like the Epstein people. This is like Epstein, right? The commentary. Anyway, uh, if one were to raise the objection that, nevertheless, all men possess ideas of the just and the unjust which can only be the product of nature, since these notions are found in every people and even amongst the uncivilized, the Duke would reply affirmatively, saying that yes, those ideas have never been anything if not relative, that the stronger have always considered exceedingly just what the weaker regard as flagrantly unjust, and that it takes no more than the mere reversal of those positions for each to be able to change his way of thinking too. Whence the Duke would conclude that nothing is really just, but what makes for pleasure and what is unjust is the cause of pain, that in taking 100 louis from a man's pocket, he was doing something very just for himself, although the victim of the robbery might have to regard the action with another eye. That all these notions, therefore, being very arbitrary, a fool, a fool he would who would allow himself to become their thrall. It was by means of argument in this kind the Duke used to justify his transgressions, and as he was a man of greatest possible wit, his arguments had a decisive ring, and so, modelling his conduct upon his philosophy, the Duke had from his most tender youth abandoned himself unrestrainedly to the most shameful extravagances and the most extraordinary ones. His father having died young, and as I indicated, left him control of a huge fortune, had, however, stipulated in his will that the young man's mother should, while she lived, be allowed to enjoy a large share of this legacy. Such conditions was not in displeasing Duke Blanges, poisoning poison appearing to be the only way to avoid having to subscribe to this article. The knave straightway decided to make use of it, but this was the period when he was the only was only making his first steps to a vicious career. Not daring to act himself, he brought one of his sisters, with whom he was carrying on a criminal intrigue, to take charge of the execution, assuring her that if she were to succeed, he would see it that she would be the beneficiary of that part of the fortune whereof death would deprive their mother. However, the young lady was horrified by this proposal, and the Duke, observing that this ill-confined secret was perhaps going to betray him, decided on the spot to extend his plans to include his sister he had hoped to have for an accomplice. He conducted both women to one of his properties, whence the two unfortunate ones never returned. Nothing quite encourages as does one's first unpunished crime. This hurdle once cleared, an open field seemed to beckon for the Duke. Immediately, any person whomever showed positions to his desire, poison was employed forthwith. From necessary murders, he soon passed to those of pure pleasure. He was captivated by the regrettable folly which caused us to find delight in the suffering of others. He noticed that a violent commotion afflicted upon any kind of adversary is answered by a vibrant thrill in our own nervous system. The effect of this vibration, arousing the animal spirit which flow within these nerves, concavities, obliges them to exert pressure on the erector nerves and to provide accordance with perpetuation what is termed laborious a lubricious sensation. Consequently, he set about committing 10 thefts and murders in the name of debauchery and libertinage, just as someone else would have contend in order to inflame these same passions, to chase a whore or two. At the age of 23, he had three of his companions in vice, whom he had indoctrinated with his philosophy, made up a party whose aim was to go out and stop a public coach on the highway, to rape the men among the travellers along with the women, to assassinate them afterward, to make off with their victims' money. Very Clockwork Orange, but yeah. The conspirators, the conspirators certainly had no need of this, and need to be back that same night, all three of them, at the opera ball, in order to have a sound alibi. This crime took place. Ah, yes, two charming maids were violated and massacred in their mother's arms. To this was joined an endless list of other horrors, and no one dared suspect the Duke. Weary of the delightful wife his father had bestowed upon him before dying, Duke, the young Duke wasted no time uniting her shade to his mother's, to his sisters, and to those of all the other victims. Why all this? To be able to marry a girl wealthy, to be sure, but publicly dishonoured, and whom he knew full well was her brother's mistress. The person in question was the mother of Eileen, one of the figures in our novel we mentioned above. This second wife, soon sacrificed, like the first, gave way to the third, who followed hard on the heels of the second. It was rumoured abroad that the Dukes had huge construction was responsible for the undoing of all his wives, and that the gigantic tale corresponded in every point to its gigantic inspiration. The Duke had uh, the Duke let the um, opinionatate root and the veil the truth. That dreadful colossus did indeed make one thing One think of Hercules or a centaur. Duke stood five. Um, the Duke stood 5 foot 11 inches tall, had limbs of great strength and energy, powerful sinews, elastic nerves, in addition to that of proud and masculine visage, great dark eyes, handsome black eyeshades, and aquiline nose, aquiline nose, fine teeth, a quality of health and exuberance, broad shoulders, a heavy chest but well proportioned figure withal, splendid hips, superb buttocks, the handsome leg in the world, and an iron temperament, the strength of a horse, the member of a veritable mule, wondrously, uh, uh, wonderfully hirsute, blessed with the ability to eject its sperm any number of times within a given day, and at will, even at the age of 50, which was his age at the time, a virtually constant erection in this member, whose dimension were an exact 8 inches for circumference and 12 for length overall. And there you have the portrait of the Duke, drawn as accurately as if you wield the pencil yourself. But if this masterpiece of nature was violent in its desires, what was it like? Okay. Thank you for the description. Right, continue. Great God, when crowned by drunken 11 von Ponchot, uh, God, this word, uh, vol, Volopontinus, by 11 Volopontinus. 'Twas man no longer, 'twas a raging tiger. Woe unto him who happened then to be serving its passions. Frightfully cries, atrocious blasphemies sprang from the Duke's swollen breast. Flames seemed to dart from his eyes. He foamed at the mouth. He whined like a stallion. You'd have taken him from the very god of lust. Whatever then was his manner of having his pleasure, his hands necessarily strayed, roaming continually, and had been more than once seen to strangle women to death at the instance of his perfidious discharge. Oh, goodness me. His presence of mind was once restored. His frenzy was immediately replaced with the most complete indifference to the infamies wherewith he had just indulged himself, and this indifference of this kind of apathy further sparked the lechery would be born almost at once. Okay. In his youth, the Duke had been known to discharge as often as 18 times a day, and with that without appearing one jot more fatigued after the final than after the initial ejaculation. 7 or 8 crises within the same interval still held no terrors for him, his half a century of years notwithstanding. For roughly 25 years had accustomed himself to passive sodomy, and he withstood its assaults with the identical vigor characterized his manner of delivering them actively, when the very next moment it pleased him to exchange roles. He had once uh, wagered that he could sustain 55 attacks in a day, and so he had furnished, as we have pointed out, the prodigious strength. He needed only one hand to violate a girl, and he had proven it upon several occasions. One day he boasted he could squeeze the life out of a horse with its leg. He mounted the beast, it collapsed at the instant he had uh, predicated. His prowess at the table outshone, if that is possible, what he demonstrated upon the bed. There is nothing imagining what had come to the quantity of the food he consumed. He regularly ate 3 meals a day, and they were all three exceedingly prolonged and exceedingly copious, and it was nothing to him to toss down his usual 10 bottles of Burgundy. He had drunk up to 30, and needed but to be challenged, and he would set out for the mark of 50, but his intoxication taking on the tinge of his passion, and liquors of wines having heated his brain, would wax furious, and they would be obliged to tie him down. And despite all that, would you believe it, a steadfast child might have hurled his giant into a panic. True, indeed, it is that the spirit often poorly corresponds with the flesh, sheath enveloping it as soon as Duke Belangus, excuse me, as soon as Duke Belangus discovered he could no longer use his treachery or his deceit to make away with his enemy, he had become timid and cowardly, and the mere thought of even the mildest combat, but fought on equal terms, would have sent him fleeing to the ends of the earth. He had nevertheless, in keeping with custom, been in one or two campaigns, but had acquitted himself acquainted himself so disgracefully he had retired from the service at once, justifying his uh, turpitude with equal amount of cleverness and uh, effrontery. Effrontery. He loudly proclaimed that his uh, poltroonery, being nothing other than the desire to preserve himself, were perfectly impossible for anyone in his right sense to condemn it for a fault. Keep in mind the identical moral traits. Next, adapt them to an entity from the physical point of view, infinitely inferior to the one we just described. There you have a portrait of Bishop X, the Duke de Longs, the Duke's brother. The same black soul, the same penchant for crime, the same contempt for religion, the same atheism, the same deception and cunning, and yet more subtle and uh, erudite mind. However, the more and more art in guiding his victims to their doom. But a slender figure, not heavy, no, a little thin body, wavering health, very delicate nerves, a great fastentatious in the pursuit of pleasure, mediocre prowess, a most ordinary member, even small, but defect, proudly skilled in management, each time yielding so little that his increasingly inflamed imagination would render him incapable of tasting delight quite as frank, quite as frequently as his brother. His sensations were of a remarkable acutance. He would experience an irritation so prodigious he would often fall into deep swoon upon discharging, and he almost always temporarily lost consciousness when doing so. He was 45, had delicate features, rather attractive eyes, but foul mouth and ugly teeth, uh, a hairless, pallid body, a small but well-shaped ass, and a prick 5 inches around and 6 in length. And I idolater of active and passive sodomy, but eminently of the latter. He spent his life having himself buggered, and this pleasure, which never required much expense of energy, was best suited to the modesty of his means. We will speak of his other tastes in good time. With what regards those of the table, he carried them nearly as far as the Duke, but went about the matter with somewhat more sensuality. Monsignore, no less a criminal than his elder brother, possessed characteristics which had doubtless permitted him to match the celebrated feats of the hero we painted a moment ago. We will content ourselves with citing one of them. 'Twill be enough to make the reader see what such a man may be capable, and what he was prepared and disposed to do, having done the following. One of his friends, a man powerful and rich, had formerly had an intrigue with a young noblewoman who had uh, borne him borne him borne him a two children, a girl and a boy. He had, however, never been able to wed her, and the maiden had become another's wife. The unlucky girl's lover died while still young, but the owner, howbeit a tremendous fortune, having no kin to provide for, it occurred to him to bequeath all, all he had the two ill-fated children his affair produced. On his deathbed, he made the bishop privy to his intentions, and entrusted him with these two immense endowments. He divided the sum, put them in two purses, and gave them to the bishop, confiding the two orphans' education to the man of God, and enlisting him to pass on to each what was to be his when they attained their majority. At the time, he enjoined the prelate to invest his ward's funds, so that when in the meantime they would double in size. He also affirmed that it was his design to leave his offspring's mother in eternal ignorance on what he was doing for them, and he absolutely insisted that none of this should ever be mentioned to her. These arrangements concluded, the dying man closed his eyes, and Monsignore found himself master of about 1 million in banknotes and of two children. The scoundrel was not long deliberating his next step. The dying man had spoken to no one but him. The mother was to know nothing. The children were only 4 and 5 years old. He circulated the intelligence that his friend, upon expiring, had left his fortune to the poor. The rascal acquired it in the same day. But to ruin those wretched children did not suffice. Furnished with authority by their father, the bishop, who never committed one crime without constantly conceiving another, had the children removed from the remote pension in which they were being brought up, and placed them under the roof of certain people in his hire, from the outset, having resolved soon to make them serve his perfidious lust. He waited until they were about 13. The little boy was the first to arrive at the age. The bishop put him to use, bent him to all his debaucheries, and as he was extremely pretty, sported him with him for a week. But the little girl fared less well. She reached the prescribed age, but was very ugly, a fact which had no mitigating effect upon the good bishop's lubricious fury. His desires appeared. He feared lest these children, left alive, would some day discover something of the secret of their interests. Therefore, he conducted them to an estate belonging to his brother, and sure of the recapturing by means of a new crime, the sparks of lechery enjoyment had just caused him to lose his ameliorated Toulouse. He ameliorated both of them with his ferocious passion, and accompanied their death with episodes so piquant and so cruel that his voluptuousness was reborn in the midst of the torments where he beset them. The thing is, unhappily, only too well known. There is no libertine, at least a little. Uh, uh, um, there is no libertine, at least a little steeped in vice, who is not aware of the great sway murder exerts over these senses, and how voluptuously it determines a discharge, and that in a general truth whereof it was well the reader be early advised, before undertaking the perusal of work which will surely attempt to ample development of this system. Yes, Luke, sorry, this is a live reading. You've walked into hell, so enjoy. The president, um, sorry, wrong chapter. Henceforth, at ease in the face of whatever might transpire, Monsignore returned to Paris to enjoy the fruit of his misdeeds, and without the least qualms about having counteracted the intentions of a man who, in his present situation, was in no state to derive either pain or pleasure therefrom. The President de Courval was a pillar of society, almost 60 years of age, and worn by debauchery to a singular degree. He offered the eye not much more than a skeleton. He was tall, he was dry, thin, had two blue, lustreless eyes, a livid and unwholesome mouth, a prominent chin, a long nose, hairy as a satry, flat-backed, with slack, drooping buttocks, and rather resembled a pair of dirty rags flapping upon his upper thighs. The skin of those buttocks was, thanks to whip strokes, so deadened and toughened that you could size up the handful of needed without feeling. Um, I'll skip that bit. Just awful. In the centre of it, there was a display. There was displayed. No need to spread those cheeks in immense orifices whose enormous diameter, odour, and colour bore a closer resemblance to the depths of well frightened and privy than to an arsehole, and crowning touch of these allurements. There was numbered among these sodomizing pigs little idiosyncrasies, that of always leaving these particular parts of himself in such a state of uncleanliness that one was at all times able to observe the goodness me, this is awful. Yeah, observe the rim of a pad of 2 inch thick, below a belly as wrinkled as it was livid and gummy. One perceived within a forest of hair, and a tool which in its erectile condition might have had about 8 inches long and around 7, but this condition had come to the most rare, and to procure its furious sequence of things was the necessary preliminary. Nevertheless, the event occurred at least 2 or 3 times each week, and upon these occasions the President would glide into every hole to be found, indiscriminately, although that of a young lad's behind was infinitely most precious to him. The head of the President's devices was now at all time exposed, for he had himself circumcised, a ceremony which largely facilitates enjoyment, and in which all pleasure loving person ought to submit. But one of the purposes of the same operations is to keep this privity cleaner. Nothing of the sort in Cavill's case. This part of him was just as filthy as the others. Goodness. Okay. His uncapped head, naturally quite thick to begin with, and thus made it an inch ampler in circumference, primarily untidy about the rest of his person. The president, who furthermore had tastes in the least, at the very least, as nasty as his appearance, had become a figure whose rather uh, malodorous vicinity might not have um, succeeded in pleasing everyone. However, his colleagues were not at all the sort to be scandalized by such trifles, and they simply avoided discussing the matter with him. Few mortals had been as free in their behavior or as debaucherous as the president, but entirely jaded, absolutely besotted. All that remained to him was the depravations um, and lewd God, uh, depravings and lewd profligacy and libertinage. Above 3 hours of excesses, and the most outrageous excesses, there were needed before one could hope to inspire a voluptuous reaction in him. As for his emission, although in Cavil the phenomenon was far more frequent than erection, and one could be observed once every day, it was all the same so difficult to obtain, or it never occurred save as a aftermath to things so strange, often so cruel, or so unclean, that the agents of his pleasure, not uncommon, renounced the struggle, fainting by the wayside, which would give birth in some kind of lugubrious anger, and this, through its effects, would now again triumph where his efforts had failed. Kerbel was to such a point mired down in his morass of vice and libertinage that it had become virtually impossible for him to think or speak of anything else. He unendingly had the most appalling expression in his mouth, just as he had the vilest design in his heart, and these with the surpassing energy he mingled with blasphemies and uh, im- imprecations supplied him by his true horror, a sentiment he shared with his companions for everything that smacked of religion. This disorder of mind, yet further argument, had almost conti- uh, continually intoxication, in which he was fond of keeping himself, had during the 16 past few years given him the air of imbecility and prostration, which he would declare made hi- made made for his most cherished delight. Born as a great gourmand, as a drunk, alone. He alone was fit to keep abreast of the Duke, and in the course of this tale we will behold him to perform wonders which will no doubt astonish the most veteran eaters. Uh, it has been 10 years since Cavil had ceased to discharge his um, judicial duties. It was not simply that he was no longer fit to carry them out, but I even believe that while he had been, he may have been asked to leave these matters alone for the rest of his life. Cavil had led a very libertine life Every sort of perversion was familiar to him, and those who knew him personally had the strong suspicion he owed a vast fortune to nothing other than 2 or 3 murders. However that may be, it is, in the light of the following story, highly probable that the variety of extravagance had the power to stir him deeply, and in this adventure, which attracted some unfortunate publicity, that was responsible for the exclusion from the court. We are going to relate the episode in order to give the reader the idea of this character. Okay. There, there dwelled in the neighbourhood of Town House a miserable street porter who, the father of a charming little girl, was ridiculous enough to be a person of sensibility. 20 messages of every kind had already arrived containing proposal relating to the poor fellow's daughter. He and his wife had remained unshaken despite this barrage aimed at their corruption, and Cavell, the source of these embassies, only irritated by the growing number of refusals they had evoked, knew not what knew not what tack to take in order to get his hand upon the girl and to subject her to his libidinous caprices, until it struck him that by simply having the father broken he would lead the daughter to his bed. The thing was so nicely conceived as executed. 2 or 3 bullies in the president's pay intervened in the suit, and before the month was out, the wretched porter was enmeshed in an imaginary crime which seemed to have been committed at his door, which got him speedily lodged in one of the most congruous. uh, uh, sorry, I was just looking ahead. It's ridiculous. Congruous dungeons. The president, as one would expert soon take charge of the case and have no desire to permit it to drag on, arranged in the space of 3 days, thanks to his uh, uh, connivery and his gold, to have an unlucky porter condemned to be broken on the wheel, without the culprit ever having committed any crime but that of wishing to preserve his honor and safeguard his daughters. God, this is fucking dark. Um, Meanwhile, the solicitations were renewed. The mother was brought in. It was explained to her that she alone had it in her power to save her husband, that if she were to satisfy the president, what could be cleaner than that he would thereupon snatch her husband from the dreadful fate um, awaiting him. Further hesitation was impossible. The woman made inquiries. Kervill knew perfectly well to whom she addressed herself. The counsels were creatures, and they gave her unambiguous replies. She ought not waste a moment. The poor woman herself brought her daughter, weeping, to her judge's feet. The latter could not have been more liberal with his promises, nor have been less eager to keep his word. Not only did he fear least where he too deal honourably and spare the husband, the man might go and raise an uproar upon discovering the price that had been paid to save his life. But the scoundrel even found a further delight, a yet keener one, in arranging to have himself given what he wished without being obliged to make any return. I mean, this president's just evil. He's just, I mean, they're all pretty despicable people, but anyway, this thought led to others. Numerous criminal possibilities entered his head, and their effect was to increase his perfidious lubricity and there is how he set about the matter, so as to put the maximum of infamy and piquancy into the scene. Right. Oh dear. Okay, that's. I will pause a minute here because I think maybe maybe for our own sanities here we do have to take a step back. It is important to note that, as Luke points out, that sadism was named after him, which is true. And this particular, because it was not complete in its actuality because of the revolution, the storming of the Bastille, and everything. So there were parts of this that were lost. It was transcribed by what would become it would be sort of rediscovered in the 20th century by and transcribed by a quote unquote German sexologist, which would then be called, I think it was uh, Block. His name was Block, and yes, early life checks out on that one. And who would also go on to inspire Freud and Ayn Rand and all those people who wanted to, maybe would not agree in the most extreme examples of this, but were interested in the idea that, yeah, the highest form of being as a person is basically giving in to your natural urges, like these natural urges, right? That this is that basically pleasure is the highest form of being, and that is universal today. The values of today's society in Britain, in the West in general, and these values, I believe, is what is destroying it. And I think probably what most of our values now. A Nietzschean problem, must I say, more of a Heidegger sort of concept, a more, you know, right wing, and I think even Bowden talked about this. That actually the liberal conception of life is that life is about and becoming is about pleasure, about lust and pleasure. But in the others, the sort of reverse, the counter to this is that life is about death and facing our own ontology and discovery as a people and as a heroic individual. And that is the counter to this. Um, it's quite interesting when you. The thing though is, even though it's shocking, it's it at the same time. I mean, I it, it it is shocking in the sense of the criminality of it and the characters and their personalities, but at the same time the actions of it aren't. They're not as I can see why maybe in the 18th century this would be like a complete mind-bending experience. For this would probably mentally cripple a reader from from the 19th century. A normal sort of well-adjusted person, this would be like I mean, this would be the work of Satan, no doubt. But I was I was on Twitter today, sharing this as a the stream, promoting it. And as I was scrolling through, I noticed like uh people, who are nominally right wing sharing, like, you had like Kanye who was retweeted a post of this pornographic comic with like an interracial rape scene. And then on top of that, as I was scrolling down, there was like Nick Buckley or Buckby, um, uh, who is another character, shared a video. He was going, "Oh, this is terrible. This is what This is the death of modern Britain," and he was sharing a video of this um not Bonnie Blue, but the other one that sort of hangs around, and she's walking around the streets of London with cum all over her face. And the reason I highlight this is that um, even those on our side fall into this depraved liberal trap where they're enmeshing themselves, engrossing themselves in this lifestyle, willingly or unwillingly. And that is the greatest tragedy of it all, because, you know, they win. On Caligula, Aubrey Reality, on Caligula, I think, do you know what's funny? I actually think the only thing Caligula would be annoyed about is he would be annoyed about the status of men doing this. He would be like, "No, this needs to be totally elitist, and maybe like, yeah, we should be like he'd be like we should be like abusing Greek boys or something." He'd probably be something like that. Um, the thing with Caligula, he always target well, not always, but he mainly according to his certain famous incidents, he would target members of the Roman elite. He would sort of target them. He would mock the Senate and stuff. So you could argue Caligula was like a populist hero. He's like a Roman Robin Hood, but just a perverted version. I don't know. I mean, everyone knows I'm a famous Caligula apologist. Yeah, Tiberius was notorious, and Nero. I mean, Nero was definitely, you know, sort of into. Well, it was also like like proto transgenderism. Of course, the tranny movement back in the day would never, you know, wouldn't class Nero as an ally. Anyway, um, now I will down the hill that Caligula was based, because of his contempt with Senate and Senate procedures. Jeffros Epistemios. Well, uh, I can't comment because I'll just be accused of anti-Semitism again. So where are we? So so we're starting off in his mansion. His mansion stood facing a spot where criminals are sometimes executed in Paris, and as this particular offence had been committed in that quarter of the city, he won assurances the punishment would be meted out on the particular square. The wretch's wife and a daughter arrived at the president's home at the appointed hour. All windows overlooking the square were well shuttered, so that from the apartments where he amused himself with his victims, nothing at all could be seen of what was going on outside. Apprised of the exact minute of the execution, the rascal selected it for the deflowering of the little girl who had held in her mother's arms, and everything was so happily arranged that Cavell discharged into Jesus fuck. Uh, uh, well, basically, buggery. Um, I can't read this out. I mean, this is awful. It, um, um, oh, okay. So he basically finished in the young girl's backside as soon as his father died. But he goes into quite a descriptive term for that. It's dark as fuck. Um, God. Um, Instantly he completed his business, "Come, have a look," quoth he, opening a window, looking upon the square. "Come see how well I've kept my bargain." And one of his two princesses saw her father, the other her husband, delivering up his soul to the headsman's steel. Both collapsed in a faint, but Cavell had provided for everything. This swoon was their agony. They had both been poisoned, and never more opened their eyes. Oh, goodness me. I mean, this Cavell character is probably like the top 10 villain like of all time. I mean, this guy is just like pure evil. Um, Notwithstanding the precautions he had taken to swathe the whole of this exploit in the most profound mystery, something did indeed transpire. Nothing was known of the woman's death, and there existed a lively suspicion that he had been untruthful in connection with the husband's case. His motive was half known, and his eventual retirement from the bench was the outcome. As of this moment, no longer having to maintain appearances, Cavell flung himself into a new ocean of errors and crimes. He sent everywhere for victims to sacrifice to the perversity of his taste, through an atrocious refinement of cruelty, but one, however, very easily understood. The downtrodden classes were those upon which he most enjoyed hurling the effects of his raging perfidy. He had several minions who were abroad night and day, scouring attics and hovels, tracking down whatever of the most destitute misery might be able to provide, and under the pretext of dispensing aid, either by envenenment his catch to give poison was one of his most delectable pastimes, or he lured it to his house and slew it upon the altar of his perverse preferences. Men, women, children, anything was fuel to his rage, and at its bidding he performed excesses which would have got his head between a block and a blade 1,000 times over, were it not for the silver he distributed and the esteem he enjoyed, factors whereby he uh, was able 1,000 times protected. One may well imagine such a being had no more religion than his two uh, conferees. He without doubt detested it sovereignly as they, but in years past had done more to wither it to in others. For in the days when his mind had been sound, he had also been clever, and he put it to good use writing against religion. He was the author of several works whose influence had been uh, prestigious in, and these successes had him present in his memory still constituted one of his dearest delights. The more we multiply the object of our enjoyments, A, the years of the sickly childhood, B, Ducat in 53, he is a small, short, broad, thickened, set on an agreeable, hearty face, a very white skin, his entire body, and principally his hips and buttocks, absolutely like a woman's. His arse is cool and fine, chubby, firm and dimple, but excessively agaped, owing to the habit of sodomy. His prick is extraordinarily small, 'tis scarcely 2 inches, sound, no more than 4 inches long, uh, is entirely ceased to stiffen. His discharge is rare and easy, far from abundant, and always uh, preceded by spasm which hurl him to a kind of fury, which in turn conducts him to crime. He has a chest like a woman's, a sweet, pleasant voice, and when in society, the best bred manners, although his mind is without question as depraved as his colleagues, schoolmates of the Duke. They still sport together every day, and one of um, Ducat's loftiest pleasure is to have his anus tickled by the Duke's enormous member. Oh dear. It is just to answer the higher being is a demon. Well, if you're referring to what the author in this book is, I mean, yeah, anything referring to a higher being is yeah, is pretty is um they're sort of appealing to nature. What I was referring to earlier when I said um the counter to this sort of level of madness where I believe where liberalism springs from is or the social effects of liberalism is is effectively anti-tran the transcendent, because they look inwards into their own desires, and their own sort of and their own desires feed their own sickening tastes, which then they formulate as a base base for a philosophy, um, which is kind of like polishing a turd. They're the counter to this, you try to conquer you with you is forms of strength, because all these characters are described as feminine, weak, timid, cowardly. um I mean, they are the epitome against anything. um I mean, on a biological sense, on a spiritual sense, they reject virtue, but on a physical and biological sense, they lack any physical virtue. So it's not just in their soul, and it's on a biological and physical sense that these people are evil, which is an interesting description. I find that quite interesting, the way that the author has described, and he refers to them, interchanges them as the four villains or the four heroes, depending on what phase you're talking about in their lives. Um, and I can't tell if this is meant to be like some of their actions is an extreme critique of the social order of the day, because this is in the, you know, um, this is part of this is he is like rage. The author is raging against um, the regime, who it feels it is, you know, uh, punishing and persecuting the third estate, the peasants, at the expense. And he expressed this through, this sort of like level of sexual fantasy. um but then he interchanges it with villains and heroes, so that is interesting. I don't know if anyone knows, can come back on that. Anyway, let's continue. And such, dear reader, are the four villains whose company I am going to have you pass a few months. I have done my best to describe them, if as I have wished. I have made you familiar with them, their most secret depths. Nothing in the tale of their various follies will astonish you. I have not been able to enter into minute detail with what regard their tastes. To have done so now would have been to impair the value and to harm the main scheme of this work. But as we move progressively along, you will have to keep an attentive eye upon our heroes, and you'll have no trouble discerning their characteristics, presidency, and particularly type of voluptuous mania which best suits each of them. Roughly, all we can say at the present time is that they were generally susceptible of the enthusiasm of sodomy, and the four of them had themselves buggered regularly, and they all four worshipped behinds. Oh dear. The Duke, however, relatively to the immensity of his weapon, and doubtlessly more thoroughly cruelty than from taste, still fucked cunts with greatest pleasure. So also did the President, but less frequently. As for the bishop, such was his supreme loathing for them that for them the mere sight of one might have kept him limp for 6 months. He had never in all his life fucked one, that belonging to his sister-in-law, and expressly to beget a um, child wherewith some day to procure himself the pleasure of incest. We have seen how well he succeeded. Ugh, goodness me. Well, I barely even started this damn book, and it's already. Oh, okay. As regards Duquette had certainly idolized the ass with such much fervor that as the bishop, but his enjoyment of it was more accessory. His favorite attacks were directed toward a third sanctuary. This mystery will be unveiled in the sequel, but on this portrait, it's essential to the intelligence of this work. I mean, thank God for the storming of the Bastille. Am I right? And the mindless burnings and looting and ransacking. So this never. Anyway, sorry. Let me continue. Intelligence of work, and let us give our reader an idea for these worthy husbands for wives. What a contrast! Constance, the Duke's wife and the daughter of Ducat, was a tall woman, slender, lovely as a picture, and modelled as if the Graces had taken pleasure in embellishing her, but the elegance of her figure in no way detracted from her freshness. She was not for the less plumply fleshed and most delicious forms, graced by the skin fairer than the lily, often induced one to suppose that no, it had been love itself who had undertaken her formation. Her face was a trifle long, her features wonderfully noble. More majesty than gentleness was in her look, more grandeur than subtlety. Her eyes were large, black, and full of fire. Her mouth extremely small and ornamented by the fine teeth imaginable. She had a narrow, supple tongue of the loveliest pink, and her breath was sweeter still than the scent of the rose. She was full-breasted. Her bosom was buxom, fair as alabaster, and as firm. Her back was turned in an extraordinary way, its lines sweeping deliciously down to the most artistical and most precisely cleft ass nature has produced in a long time. Nothing could have been more perfectly round, not very large, but firm, white dimple with, and when it was opened, what used to peep out, but the cleanest, most winsome, most delicate hole, a nuance of tenderness, pink shaded this ass, um, charming asylum of lubricity, sweetest pleasure, but great God, it was not for long to preserve so many charms. 4 or 5 attacks, and the Duke had spoiled all those graces. How quickly had they gone! And soon after her marriage, Constance was becoming no more than an image of a beautiful lily, wherefrom the temptress of late stripped the petals away. Two round and perfectly moulded thighs support another temple in the likelihood less delicious, but to incline to worship there, offering so many allurements, it would be in vain where my pen to strive to uh, describe them. Constance was almost a virgin when the Duke married her, and her father, the only man who had known her, and had, as they say, left that side of her perfectly intact, the most beautiful black hair, failing in natural curls to below her shoulders, and when one wished it thus, reaching down to the pretty fur of the same colour, which shaded her voluptuous little cunt, made for a further adornment. I might have been guilty of omitting, and lent this angelic creature, aged about 22, all the charms nature is able to lavish upon a woman. To all those amenities Constance joined a fair and agreeable wit, a spirit somewhat more elevated than it ought to have been, considering the melancholy situation fate had awarded her, for thereby she was enabled to sense all its horrors, and doubtless she would have been happier if furnished with less delicate perceptions. She was too smart for her own good. Okay. Um, Ducat, who also raised her more as if she was courtesan than his daughter, and who had been much more concerned to give her talents than manners, all the same never been able to totally to destroy the principles of rectitude and of virtue. It seemed nature had been pleasured to engrave in her heart. She had no formal religion. No one had ever mentioned such a thing to her. The exercise of a belief was not to be tolerated in her father's household, but all that had not blotted out this modesty, this natural humility, which has nothing to do with theological chimeras, and which, when it dwells in a upright, decent, and sensitive soul, is very difficult to obliterate. Never had she stepped out of her father's house, and the scoundrel had forced her, beginning at the age of 12, to serve his capricious pleasures. Oh dear. She found a world of difference in those in the Duke imbibed her with her. Her body was notably altered by those formidable dimensions, and the day after the Duke had despoiled her of her Maidenhead, Sodom, mystically speaking, she had fallen dangerously ill. Ugh, uh, they believed her rectum had been irreparably damaged, but her health had some salutary local remedies soon restored the use of that forbidden avenue to the Duke, and the luckless Constance, forced to accustom herself to the daily torture, um, but one among entirely recovery, uh, but one amongst others entirely recovered and became adjusted to everything. Oh dear, that's page 26. This is I was aware of this sort of stuff, and it is like dark stuff. I'm coming up to the hour, so quite a few people have checked out, because it's gruesome. A quick summary here, because he's introduced. We're in the stage of introducing all the characters. Let me just see how many. If you got Adelaide and uh, I will. Oh, I mean, I promised to do a live reading. I didn't promise to complete it. Um, right. I might do a part two. We'll see how this stream does. See if it nukes my channel. Um, I'll leave it here for the moment, and we will pick it up another time. But from what I can see, apart from the sort of sadistic torture and incest and rape and all the madness that goes along with it, um, it, it's really funny. It's not like on a on the moral framework of the day. So that would be the religion, and that would be particularly, I guess, in the contemporary times, the Christian faith, the Roman Catholic Church, is completely devoid from that family's household, and it's they deliberately not even referenced by name, only by small points there. And I mean, the purpose of these people is they are just they accept that they have these, they reject virtue. They believe that all power for them, the way that they can self-actualize themselves is through these sort of diabolical schemes and um, you know enacting on their own desires, um, and they become their own moral arbiters. Really, they become their own decision. I mean, you have like this figure who is like the president who has the say of who to execute, and while doing so, sexually abuses. It it is it kind of does represent like the modern elites in some capacity because yeah, and this is where we're going to draw it back to contemporary politics, for example. If you take the um, grooming gangs now in this in the UK, the Pakistani rape gangs. If you take what we've been talking here tonight, um, it wasn't a racially motivated. It wasn't it was about these individual characters who were trying to find to basically find their own sort of like self-becoming through lust, through libertine philosophy, and through this sort of jaded philosophy, um, which giving into the most primal forms of animalistic natural law. But what they do is that they have this sort of coded vanguard set of ideas, which is what protects them, and also which um, separates them from their own sort of countrymen. If you take the grooming gangs and everything, I mean, there is a strong racial uh, aspect to that. But when you actually look at the police, the local political parties like the Labour Party and councillors and people involved. And this is where when any topic comes up on this, it's always how could this have happened? We need an inquiry. We don't really need an inquiry. If you want to know why white British people, police, politicians, journalists, um, um, these sorts of figures of from a bourgeois, liberalized society, and many of them liberals themselves, they inadvertently go through the logical, the secularized self-selection that you see here, where they come out with, uh, you know, basically copes, um, and they end up sort of depersonalizing and really becoming like these villainous characters that we see here. Um, Jack Straw, for example, he actually used one of the justifications in here. He said like these young men are from a different culture and they have like these animalistic stuff that is they're more that he said that they're more animalistic, they're more childlike, they're more they don't understand. So he has like this sort of they have a different value set. So they this most deprived way, this deprived book has been internalized, not in its most extreme form, but has been internalized nonetheless in all aspects of liberal society that we see today. It's been internalized, it's been adopted, and it's used as an approach. And we have seen this through the works of Freud, through the works of Ayn Rand, and all these uh, interpersonal, personal psychologists and the science, social psychology scene in the last century. It has all been internalized and given as an absolute moral good because at the end of the day, um, we have sort of gone through the minds of a psychopath who openly states that they embrace evil. But of course, in the modern liberal world, there is no evil. There is no everything is you know uh, a shade of grey. We don't have absolutes because absolutes is um, a bad form. But yet, ironic enough, these people develop their sickening theories through absolutist positions on natural law. They develop the most heinous justifications through their actions through absolute philosophy. Because otherwise, if they didn't, it would stand to reason that they would accept that they are evil and despicable, but they don't see themselves in that regard. And they see themselves beyond sort of good and evil. In but they would argue. Imagine like the characters would argue, well, good and evil is predicated on the religious hierarchy order of the day, so that's why they reject it. So yeah, that's my take on that. You know, it's funny because reading through it, and reading past all the most like the most sickening parts of it, and this really has been like really disturbing to read. It really has been just a pure, very unpleasant experience to read. But I think it's necessary because I think this stream, if this can be used to shock people, because I see so many people today, so many on the right, so many of you, yes, you, I'm looking at you, who inadvertently fall into the laps of Sodom and Gomorrah by showing it, demonstrating it, thinking it, and justifying it daily, or trying to find ways to get to justify it or get around it. You know, I understand that there is disgusting shit in this world, but retweeting it on Twitter, resharing on Facebook, like the most depraved things, it's not needed. Everybody in the world, everybody in the West, in your countries, America and Britain, knows that this insanity goes on, but we don't need to be constantly, engulfing ourselves because these people, the only way that they are able to they convert people to their sort of philosophy is that they sort of indoctrinate them and show them and everything. The more that we um see degeneracy in the most deprived aspects of the West, which harms, as I mentioned, that woman who was walking around with that Nick something or other, who's an MBE, who I've seen on Lotus Eaters and other things, who shared this video of this porn star who I see like on like the some sort of boomer posting on Facebook about going on ITV or BBC, like some sort of discussion because they get put out there. This English whore, right? who would be suited at these sort of parties, ironically, um, walking round with cum all over her face round in London. You don't need to be sharing that. The fact that you're engaging in that is you're engaging in Sodom and Gomorrah. You know, it's like that whole thing. It's like you don't need to justify debates. Debating is pointless. I mean, it's kind of like debating. You don't need to. You don't need to engulf yourself in that. Now, you could say I'm a hypocrite because I'm engulfing myself in this, but this is for a purpose. This is a higher purpose. I don't, I'm I if there was any descriptive, I mean, on a few occasions I censored tonight's reading. The one particular one with the president at the balcony watching I had to censor that because that was just utterly despicable. Phrases used in I just could not say that. I couldn't bring myself to say that because that was utterly despicable. Um, and evil stuff. But at the same time, the reason why I did this was to sort of highlight um, you know, an aspect of liberalism that isn't, we talk about the social, the group collective stuff, but let's talk about the rot that affects our group. It's not about the others. I'm not talking about the Muslims. I'm not talking about the foreigners, the aliens in our country. I'm talking about the thing that corrupts our people in our group and has for a good part of a century now, probably more. This is the point I'm getting at here. And this is what I'm trying to sort of shock people into out of liberalism. I mean, I want this to be like the shock out of liberalism, you know, the cattle prod that shocks you out of it. Sharing, you know, pornographic content on Twitter and saying, "Oh, isn't this horrific?" That is unnecessary, and you're falling for it. You know, the powers that be want you to be sharing it. They want you to be spreading it. They want you to be engulfing in the most disgusting forms of society. They want you. They want, the Weimar mindset in all of us. In all of us, they want that Weimar mindset. Anyway, thanks everyone for checking in. Um, I'll need to think about doing a part two. I won't. I'm not going to have a guest for this. This is just going to be one-on-one reading. This isn't the sort of thing to have a guest for, to be honest. This isn't one of those things, Um, not like Richard Hilton or anything like that. Anything like that. Anywho, thanks Aubrey, thanks Luke, thanks Hitman, Seb, Florida Man, and Tyrion God Emperor. Thanks to everyone for coming on and yeah. Um, I would say flooding it the way society does. Um, Flooding, I will sort of come to this point. Flooding us with this content the way society does desensitizes. Some argue that isn't true. I disagree. Um, I think it does desensitize, but also I think it actually creates this um, you know, it elevates. You think about the young generation today, and I don't want because like the old adage, "Oh, think about the young generation today." But if you think about the young generation today and what they're being exposed to in like, I had to look by it's Lily Phillips, that's her name, the example of the one that's been walking around with sperm on her face, all that sort of stuff. What you have is you have I mean, the most. narcissistic, materialistic, um, consumer-based society, which elevates, um, degrading depravity for money. You know, the Gordon Gecko, but just on steroids. And as a result, you have the type of people who elevated to idolize this and to be the spokespersons for this and to normalize this are psychopaths. It's people like in this book. It's people who um, are sick, who have no interest in the transcendent or the pursuing the transcendent. The only people who are elevated in this society and who have any worth in this liberal society are those who are who people who in normal times, in historic times, are crushed in society, are pushed to the um, fringes of society where it is kept a secret, is kept like a disgusting secret or a dirty secret, where any public outage, or any publicity around it would result in humiliation, death, and discreditment. In a normal society, all these people would be the managers would be hung, and they would be um, locked up in an asylum. Those sorts of women would be locked up in an asylum, and their managers be hung for corruption, for working with enemies of the state. That's what a normal society would do. Yeah, he did. I tell you what, me and Iron Duke, we give Napoleon a lot of bad rap. And by the way, Napoleon, he wrote a pretty well, it was like a murder fantasy of like the French when he was a young teenager, which was a bit racy in some areas, but I mean it's more like just like genocide fantasy. It's not like like from like a pure militaristic perspective. It's nothing on this scale. And I will say, probably one of the best Napoleon. There's like one of the sort of small redeeming qualities of Napoleon on this. But yeah. Anyway, yeah, I will wrap this up now. So thank you everyone for coming in and uh, being present for this horror show of a stream. Um, I don't. I would say on the final point that I think there is an element of fantasy about it, but I also agree. I think there is a political statement there, but I also think there is a sort of fetish um amazement of, you know in many ways, and this is the thing, if you look at an absolute in life at his time, the priestly caste, the priests live a life of absolute, um, you know, chastisements, of absolute monastic, particularly the monastic lifestyle, is actually the mirror opposite of what these guys were doing. Their striving for divinity was through their own. quest of self-actualizement through the church, through God, and through themselves, through prayer and ritual. And these people, in a sick, twisted way, created the reverse of that. Um, and then you have the sort of contradictory of the bishop that he puts in there. I think it is. I think there is a political statement in there, but I don't know. I want. I don't know if I want to explore that in the I don't want to. I mean, I did the politics of oblivion. That caused a bit of controversy in some things. I do the politics of Marquis de Sade, or the bishop in Marquis de Sade's work. I don't know if I want to do that. um. Anyway. Yeah, I will go now. I promise I will go now. Thank you everyone for tuning into this. And I'll see you all probably tomorrow on Iron Duke's show. Yeah. See you all next time.